Power doesn't panic over noise, it panics over anomalies. Somewhere behind closed doors, where language is polished and intentions are never spoken plainly, a rare kind of meeting takes place only when something breaks the pattern. Not a riot, not a rebellion, not even a leak. Those are manageable. What triggers urgency is when the usual pressure stops working, when conditioning fails, when outcomes refuse to align with expectations. History is clear on this. Empires don't collapse because people fight them head-on. They collapse when a small number of individuals stop responding the way they're supposed to. That's not poetry. That's a documented pattern repeated across centuries. There's an actual term used in behavioral science for this kind of anomaly: stress inoculation. It describes what happens when repeated exposure to pressure doesn't weaken the subject, but strengthens resistance instead. Most systems rely on the opposite effect. They assume stress will produce compliance, dependence, or collapse. So when a soul shows up that becomes clearer, calmer, and harder to steer under pressure, it's not admired. It's audited. Here's the uncomfortable part that rarely gets said out loud. This wasn't supposed to happen. The blueprint assumed confusion, emotional debt, self-doubt, or at the very least a desperate need for approval. What it got instead was someone who can sit in discomfort without flinching, observe without reacting, and move without announcing it. That's not heroism, that's malfunction, from the system's point of view. And no, this isn't about capes, halos, or dramatic background music. If anything, it's annoyingly quiet. No speeches, no declarations, just someone who doesn't fold, doesn't chase validation, and doesn't internalize the usual leverage. Imagine spending billions on psychological influence, social conditioning, and behavioral prediction, only for one soul to casually opt out like it's a free trial they forgot to cancel. That's not threatening, it's embarrassing. And power hates embarrassment more than opposition. So when whispers start circulating, not about what this person did, but about why nothing worked on them, that's when the tone changes. Not outrage, not confrontation, calculation. Because the real question was never how strong this soul is. The real problem is simpler, and far more disturbing to anyone who understands control. Who armored this soul? And why didn't we see it happening? Number one, this soul didn't get armored by protection. It was armored by repeated exposure to truth. Most people think protection is what makes someone strong. They believe shelter, guidance, and reassurance build resilience. In reality, protection often delays strength. What actually armored this soul was being exposed to the truth over and over again, long before it felt fair or reasonable. Not inspirational truth, not motivational quotes, real truth, the kind that shows you how people change when there's something to gain, the kind that reveals how love can turn conditional, how promises bend under pressure, and how systems quietly reward obedience more than integrity. This soul learned early that words don't mean much without consistency behind them. That lesson didn't come from wisdom being handed down. It came from watching actions contradict speeches again and again. While others were allowed to believe in appearances, this soul was forced to see what sits underneath them. And once you see that layer enough times, you stop being shocked by it. Shock is what breaks people. Familiarity is what hardens them. Repeated exposure to truth strips away fantasy. There's no room left for wishful thinking when patterns repeat with brutal accuracy. You stop expecting fairness from unfair structures. You stop expecting loyalty from people who've shown you how easily it evaporates. That doesn't make you bitter, it makes you precise. Precision is a form of armor because it reduces emotional waste. You don't spend energy reacting to things you already understand. This is why pressure didn't crush this soul. Pressure only breaks people who still believe things should be different. Once truth settles in, pressure becomes information instead of punishment. You read situations faster. You recognize motives sooner. You don't panic when something falls apart because you never built your identity on illusions to begin with. Over time, something subtle but powerful happens. Disappointment loses its sting. Betrayal loses its shock value. Manipulation loses its grip. Not because you became cold, but because you became familiar with reality as it actually is. And familiarity creates calm. That calm is what people mistake for strength. It isn't courage or confidence in the traditional sense. It's the result of living without filters for so long that nothing can catch you off guard anymore. Truth did the armoring, one exposure at a time. Number 2. The emergency summit wasn't about fear of strength. It was about fear of immunity. Most people think systems or secret networks react when someone gets powerful. They assume the concern is about talent, influence, or skill. That's easy to see. Predictable even. What terrifies them far more is when someone becomes immune. Immune to manipulation, immune to coercion, immune to the emotional levers that usually bend people into submission. That's exactly what this soul became. Ordinary control tactics, guilt, shame, fear, obligation, simply stopped working. And when the usual methods fail, it sets off alarm bells in ways that raw strength never could. Strength can be measured, challenged, and even intimidated. Immunity cannot. Immunity comes from repeated exposure to influence without giving in. It's developed when the soul experiences pressure, deceit, and chaos, and responds with observation rather than reaction. Most systems rely on predictable human behavior. They design influence around desires, fears, and habits. They build control structures, assuming people will fold under consistent pressure. But once someone refuses to bend, once someone refuses to internalize that pressure as authority, the entire predictive model collapses. That's why the summit was convened. Not because they underestimated power, but because they underestimated someone who wouldn't play by the rules at all. This soul doesn't just resist manipulation, it invalidates it. Threats that would make others crumble are absorbed as neutral data points. Promises that motivate others bounce off without effect. Even calculated social pressure loses its traction because the internal calibration of this soul isn't responding to external triggers. Immunity makes a person invisible to scripts. The ones trying to control it have nothing to read, nothing to predict, and no way to weaponize the usual levers of influence. The subtle terror for those in control is understanding that this immunity cannot be bribed, bargained with, or frightened. It exists independently, quietly, internally, and it cannot be removed. They can convene every emergency meeting, rewrite every rule, and manipulate every system around this soul. But the truth remains. Immunity isn't a weakness to overcome. It's an untouchable state, a silent fortress that renders conventional power meaningless. That realization is what keeps them awake at night, calculating, worrying, and failing to find a solution. Number 3. The armor is invisible because it's cognitive, not emotional. Most people assume resilience shows on the surface. They look for toughness in reactions, in words, in the way someone stands in a room. That's emotional armor, and it's easy to spot and easier to crack. What makes this soul untouchable isn't visible. It isn't about looking unshakable or reacting without feeling. The armor exists in the mind, in how this soul processes reality, evaluates intentions, and predicts outcomes. It's a structure built from thinking, not feeling. It's invisible because it doesn't need to be displayed. It operates silently, guiding every response and decision. This cognitive armor developed because this soul doesn't rely on instinctive reactions to emotional triggers. Most people react first and analyze later. This soul observes first and decides second. That delay isn't hesitation, it's calculation. It's an internal filter that measures truth against pattern, consistency against performance, and motive against result. Emotional manipulation, social pressure, or fear tactics have no purchase because the mind already categorized them, assessed them, and neutralized their effect before they even land. That's what makes it invisible. No one can see it, and no one can predict it. The brilliance of cognitive armor is its permanence. Emotional walls can crumble under prolonged pressure or carefully applied guilt. Emotional toughness fades, fatigue sets in, and mistakes happen. Cognitive armor, however, is reinforced every time it encounters reality. Every deception, betrayal, or inconsistency strengthens it further. It's self-reinforcing and almost impossible to penetrate because it doesn't rely on defense. It relies on awareness. It's also deceptive. People assume this soul is ordinary because it doesn't broadcast its strength. There's no chest beating, no arrogance, no defensive posture. But beneath the surface, decisions are precise, responses are measured, and moves are unassailable. Systems built to predict human behavior stumble because nothing about this soul reacts according to expectation. Its invisibility is the ultimate power, unseen, unmeasurable, untouchable. This is why those who try to manipulate, control, or intimidate this soul fail every single time, often without even realizing why. The armor doesn't shout. It simply exists, silently dismantling every attempt to bend it. Number 4. No one trained this soul. Neglect did the job. Most people think strength comes from guidance, mentorship, or careful instruction. They assume someone molds you into resilience, shows you the ropes, teaches you how to survive. That's a comforting story, but it's not what armored this soul. This soul was left to its own devices, abandoned in ways most would consider cruel, and it's precisely that absence that built an unshakable core. Neglect doesn't nurture obedience or dependence. It forces self-reliance in its purest, most unforgiving form. When no one shows up, you have no choice but to stand. You have no guide, no map, no comfort blanket. You invent your own rules, learn your own lessons, and calibrate your own morality. That's how real armor forms. Neglect exposes the raw mechanics of reality. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every time support failed to appear became a lesson etched deep into this soul's operating system. It wasn't about surviving pity or sympathy. It was about surviving without anyone's validation. Systems, people, even secret networks rely on predictability. They expect gratitude, fear, or dependence. Neglect eradicates that. This soul didn't need anyone's permission to act, didn't wait for approval, didn't build its choices around expectations. It acted, it learned, it adapted. And here's the quiet genius of it. Neglect also trains perception. With no one explaining the world, this soul became hyper-aware of patterns, inconsistencies, and hidden agendas. Observation replaced instruction. Experience replaced mentorship. While others were told what to notice, this soul learned to notice everything without anyone pointing it out. That kind of awareness isn't taught, it's enforced by circumstance. The result is a mind that operates independently of influence, a core that doesn't bend under pressure, and a discernment that can read intentions before they're even spoken. Neglect didn't make this soul bitter, it made it untouchable. Every absence, every void, every moment of being overlooked became a brick in the armor no one could see, no one could negotiate with, and no one could break. The power of being forced to stand alone is underestimated by those who believe guidance breeds strength. In truth, it breeds independence, and independence in the wrong hands is terrifying. Number 5. This soul learned how people switch masks. Most people live believing faces are permanent. They assume loyalty, love, and morality are consistent traits. That's a comforting illusion. This soul didn't get to live in illusions. It learned early that people wear masks, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of selfishness, and sometimes simply because they can. The same person who smiles at you in daylight can betray you at night. The same voice that preaches truth can twist it when it serves their purpose. Watching this happen over and over isn't easy. It's exhausting. But for this soul, it became education, strategy, and armor all at once. Understanding masks teaches more than caution. It teaches discernment. This soul didn't just notice betrayal. It recognized patterns of performance. It learned who wore masks constantly, who wore them situationally, and who tried to hide them but failed anyway. That's what separates people who are hardened from people who are just bitter. Bitter people only react to disappointment. Hardened people anticipate it, calculate it, and let it pass without disruption. That anticipation isn't coldness, it's intelligence. It's an internal system designed to see intentions behind appearances. Masks also teach patience and timing. This soul noticed that exposure is gradual. People don't reveal everything at once. Lies unfold in layers, motives show up in slips, and loyalties shift in moments. Being exposed to that over and over rewires perception. You stop trusting words, you start tracking patterns, you stop being swayed by charm, you start weighing actions against consistency. That process teaches resilience because manipulation no longer lands. Scripts fail, expectations break, emotional hooks disappear. The consequence is profound. This soul became untouchable, not because it's stronger than others, but because it sees the game before the players do. Recognition of masks doesn't create arrogance, it creates freedom. No one can control you if their strategies are transparent before they even try. That knowledge builds an invisible armor around the mind, quiet but unassailable. The moment others realize the masks are ineffective, panic sets in. This soul doesn't need to act aggressively or shout its awareness. The armor exists because understanding human deception becomes instinctive, precise, and unyielding. That is what makes someone impossible to manipulate, impossible to surprise, and impossible to break. Number 6. This soul can't be emotionally blackmailed. And that's the real threat. Most people don't realize how much control is exerted through emotions. Fear, guilt, pity, obligation. These are the invisible levers that manipulate behavior without leaving a trace. The clever ones know exactly how to pull them. A look, a word, a carefully timed silence. But this soul doesn't respond the way most humans do. None of it lands, not because of arrogance or defiance, but because the emotional system inside has been rewired through experience. When you've already survived abandonment, betrayal, and disappointment repeatedly, traditional leverage loses its grip. Attempts at manipulation feel empty, awkward, and predictable. That's not weakness, it's untouchability. Emotional blackmail relies on dependency. It assumes people need approval, fear rejection, or crave love in order to comply. This soul doesn't operate on those assumptions. Approval is irrelevant. Rejection is data. Love is observed, not exploited. When someone tries to bend this soul with guilt, it doesn't crack, it analyzes. When someone threatens, it doesn't panic, it calculates. When someone withdraws, it doesn't collapse, it adapts. That makes this soul fundamentally unmanageable. Influence that works on everyone else fails spectacularly here. And failure on that level terrifies those who rely on systems of control because it exposes the limits of power itself. The real threat is subtle but undeniable. This soul invalidates the entire strategy of emotional coercion. Systems built on predictable human weaknesses stumble. People accustomed to obedience encounter a variable they can't read. Pressure that usually produces compliance bounces off. The more manipulative tactics are deployed, the more ineffective they become, and the clearer it becomes that this soul operates outside the reach of ordinary control. That immunity is both quiet and devastating. There's no rebellion, no spectacle, no dramatic defiance. It's calm, it's precise, it's invisible. Yet its presence dismantles influence faster than confrontation ever could. Emotional blackmail only works when someone cares enough to be swayed. This soul doesn't. That is the core of the armor, the part that terrifies more than strength, more than talent, more than loyalty. It cannot be pressured, it cannot be coerced, and it cannot be bent. And that is why it remains untouchable. Number 7. The armor isn't aggression, it's discernment. People often confuse power with force. They assume the strongest stand the tallest, speak the loudest, or hit the hardest. This soul doesn't. The armor here isn't about aggression or intimidation. It's about discernment, an internal clarity that sees motives, intentions, and outcomes before they're even revealed. While others react emotionally, this soul analyzes logically. While others expend energy defending, manipulating, or controlling, this soul simply observes and decides. That precision makes it untouchable because it removes the element of surprise from every interaction. Discernment doesn't announce itself. There's no posturing, no chest beating, no overt confrontation. That's what makes it dangerous in ways that anger, strength, or violence never could be. Systems and people built to predict human behavior rely on emotional reactions. They calculate leverage based on fear, desire, guilt, and pride. When someone consistently bypasses these levers, they collapse the entire strategy of influence. This soul doesn't play the expected roles. It doesn't respond the way others do. It makes decisions that are unseen until executed, precise enough to neutralize manipulation before it begins. Discernment also creates calm under pressure. Aggression is reactive. Discernment is proactive. Threats, chaos, and deception are processed, measured, and accounted for. Nothing is wasted on emotion. Nothing is overestimated. Nothing is underprepared. That's what makes the armor invisible. No one can see it, but everyone who encounters it feels its effect. Attempts to manipulate, coerce, or intimidate simply fail quietly, leaving those who try frustrated and scrambling, often without realizing why. This kind of armor cannot be broken by force or persuasion. It doesn't rely on strength, status, or influence. It operates independently, based on internal logic and understanding. The more others push, the more this soul simply adjusts, anticipates, and navigates. Aggression might provoke a reaction, but discernment neutralizes the situation before it ever becomes a threat. That's the brilliance of this armor. It doesn't need to fight because it already sees the battlefield, knows the players, and moves in a way that leaves no opening for attack. It exists quietly, unshakable, and untouchable, and that is why it terrifies anyone trying to control or predict it. Number 8. They can't predict this soul because it doesn't move from fear or reward. Most people operate like simple machines. Push a button, get a predictable result. Threaten them, they panic. Reward them, they comply. That predictability is why control works. Systems, manipulations, and hierarchies all rely on it. This soul doesn't follow that formula. Fear doesn't push it. Pleasure doesn't pull it. External pressure, promises, or consequences are irrelevant. Decisions come from alignment with an internal code, a quiet internal logic that is entirely self-contained. That's why attempts to predict, manipulate, or control it fail every single time. When a system expects a reaction and none comes, it panics. People who try to manipulate this soul can deploy every tool in their arsenal: threats, favors, guilt, flattery. But all of it bounces off like water on polished stone. They can measure, they can calculate, they can guess, but nothing fits. The usual indicators of compliance, fear, desire, insecurity, don't exist here. Every predictable variable is gone, replaced by independent assessment. That unpredictability is the invisible armor that terrifies anyone who relies on influence. This soul's decisions are quiet, but absolute. There's no spectacle in choosing correctly, no need to announce alignment or deviation. Actions come from a clarity that operates below the noise of expectation. That makes it impossible to anticipate, because control systems aren't designed to read inner truth. They read reaction. Reaction doesn't exist. There's observation, measurement, and execution according to internal calibration, not external influence. That's what gives this soul an untouchable advantage. While others are reacting, negotiating, or performing, this one is already several steps ahead, unaffected by the push and pull that guide everyone else. Being unreadable isn't arrogance, it's survival and strategy perfected. And in a world where influence relies on predictability, being immune to it is terrifying. When people realize that nothing they do provokes the expected outcome, frustration sets in and control collapses. This soul doesn't need to dominate, attack, or display power. Its unpredictability is the armor, invisible, impenetrable, and absolute. That's why they can't plan against it, can't calculate it, and ultimately can't touch it. Number 9. The armor was built from watching consequences, not receiving warnings. Most people are taught through instruction, told what to do, warned about mistakes, and guided through consequences they might face. That builds caution, sometimes obedience, and occasionally fear. This soul learned differently. It wasn't guided by advice or preemptive warnings. It learned by watching what happened when actions were taken, when promises were broken, when loyalty faltered, and when systems collapsed under their own weight. Every consequence became a lesson, sharp and undeniable, and every observation added a layer to the armor. Experience replaced theory, and understanding became instinct. Watching consequences teaches precision. You see cause and effect without the fluff of moralizing or manipulation. When someone lies, cheats, or betrays, the ripple doesn't just touch them. It spreads through the environment, revealing patterns and vulnerabilities. This soul internalized those patterns not as paranoia, but as data points. Over time, it stopped reacting to threats that would shake others, stopped being surprised by human inconsistency, and stopped wasting energy on illusions of control. That's the difference between being armored by words and being armored by reality. The lessons gained from consequences are also permanent. Warnings can be ignored, instructions can be misapplied, but consequences, when observed closely, leave no room for misinterpretation. This soul doesn't have to be told that manipulation exists. It's already catalogued. It doesn't need to be warned that betrayal happens. It's already been mapped. Every failure, every collapse, every disappointment observed from the outside became a blueprint for survival. What makes this armor exceptional is that it's proactive, not reactive. By watching rather than being told, this soul anticipates the moves of others before they even try to influence or control. It doesn't need to react with fear, anger, or desperation. It simply moves through situations with clarity and precision, avoiding traps that would snare the unarmored. The lessons of consequences aren't theoretical. They're lived and internalized, making this soul untouchable, unshakable, and frighteningly accurate in every assessment of human behavior. This is armor forged in reality, not imagination, and it cannot be dismantled by advice, pressure, or deceit. Number 10. This soul doesn't confuse authority with truth. Most people assume that someone in power automatically knows more, speaks correctly, or deserves obedience. Titles, status, and loud voices are often mistaken for truth itself. This soul doesn't make that mistake. It doesn't automatically trust anyone because of position or prestige. It measures information, actions, and consistency before assigning credibility. Authority doesn't impress it, integrity does. That distinction is what sets this soul apart, and what terrifies anyone who relies on the illusion of power. Recognizing the difference between authority and truth requires clarity that most never develop. People are conditioned to follow instructions, accept hierarchy, and respect rank. They internalize the idea that leaders are inherently correct, that influence equals insight, and that compliance is survival. This soul watched those systems in action and realized they operate on obedience, not accuracy. Lies, manipulation, and self-interest hide behind every title. By observing patterns and outcomes rather than labels, this soul learned to filter the signal from the noise. That kind of perception is a form of invisible armor because it renders conventional control useless. The danger to systems is subtle but devastating. Commands lose weight, threats lose teeth, and incentives lose meaning. When someone doesn't automatically defer to authority, the usual levers of influence fail. Manipulators expect predictability. They assume fear, respect, or ambition will dictate compliance. This soul bypasses all of that. It assesses truth independently, evaluates motives critically, and acts according to understanding, not expectation. That makes it unpredictable and untouchable in ways authority fears. Over time, this discernment becomes internalized. No matter how many layers of status or influence are thrown in its path, the soul remains unmoved. Integrity and reality outweigh hierarchy every time. The ability to separate authority from truth transforms ordinary perception into a kind of preemptive defense. The armor here isn't physical or emotional. It's cognitive, precise, and invisible. Those who rely on their position to control others find it useless against this soul. That is why it becomes untouchable, unreadable, and impossible to dominate, leaving those in power scrambling to find a method that simply does not exist. Number 11. The armor activated when this soul stopped needing to be understood. Most people live with a constant need for validation. They want to be seen, heard, and comprehended. They adjust their words, actions, and even thoughts to fit the expectations of others. That need creates vulnerability because when someone doesn't understand you, you feel unsettled, desperate, or defensive. This soul broke free of that. The armor wasn't forged through force or confrontation. It was forged the moment it stopped trying to explain itself. When the need to be understood vanished, a quiet, impenetrable strength took its place. Needing to be understood ties you to other people's perceptions. It allows influence to slip in, even subtly. Approval, empathy, or recognition becomes a lever, and manipulators know exactly how to pull it. But this soul refused to engage in that transaction. Misunderstanding didn't frustrate it. It became irrelevant. Silence from others, judgment or misinterpretation no longer carried weight. By detaching from the expectation of comprehension, this soul insulated itself from one of the most powerful tools of influence, the desire to be validated. Freedom from needing to be understood also sharpened awareness. When you stop explaining yourself, you observe without distraction. You notice who projects, who hides, and who attempts to control through perception. You see patterns without interference from emotional compromise. The world becomes a map of actions and motives rather than opinions and judgments. That clarity builds armor that is invisible yet impenetrable, because it operates beneath the surface, in the way decisions are made and reactions are chosen. This is why those who try to manipulate or control this soul fail repeatedly. It doesn't react to misunderstanding because it doesn't rely on comprehension for direction or motivation. It moves according to its own internal logic, priorities, and alignment. That independence is unnerving to systems that thrive on predictability. By detaching from the need to be understood, this soul transformed vulnerability into strength, exposure into defense, and isolation into untouchable power. The armor here isn't loud or visible. It's the quiet certainty that nothing outside can define, control, or sway the trajectory of this soul. Number 12. This soul carries historical memory without studying history. Most people think knowledge comes from books, lessons, or careful study. They believe awareness requires formal education or conscious effort. This soul learned differently. It absorbs patterns naturally, instinctively, by watching how people act, how systems collapse, and how power shifts over time. There's no textbook, no lecture, no guide, yet somehow the lessons of centuries, betrayal, greed, cycles of manipulation, and the predictable rise and fall of influence are already encoded in the way this soul perceives the world. It recognizes patterns others will only notice after repeating the same mistakes again and again. This kind of historical memory is quiet but lethal. While others stumble through situations expecting novelty, this soul anticipates repetition. It doesn't wait to see how a scenario unfolds because it has already seen it, internally, through instinct and observation. Lies, power plays, betrayal, and loyalty are all predictable once you recognize the cycles behind them. That awareness isn't taught. It emerges from a combination of experience, attention, and survival instinct. Over time, it becomes second nature. Decisions, reactions, and judgments happen faster, cleaner, and with far fewer errors than anyone around could expect. The power of carrying history this way is subtle, but absolute. It removes the advantage of surprise from manipulators, deceivers, and opportunists. While others panic or overreact when patterns repeat, this soul responds with calm efficiency. It doesn't need warnings, instructions, or hindsight. Every move can be measured against patterns already understood. That creates a mental armor that is nearly impossible to breach because it doesn't rely on reactionary force. It relies on anticipatory precision. What makes it extraordinary is that no one can predict how this soul sees the world. You can't threaten it with novelty, deceive it with innovation, or manipulate it with hidden motives. It reads through the cycle before anyone else realizes it exists. Historical memory without study isn't arrogance. It's instinct sharpened into an impenetrable shield. It allows this soul to move through chaos unshaken, decisions calculated, motives exposed, and every situation navigated with a clarity that feels almost unnatural to those still trapped in the cycle of repetition. That is armor you cannot touch, imitate, or prepare for. Number 13. The summit happened because this soul can't be broken into roles. Most people are shaped, controlled, or defined by roles. Victim, hero, martyr, rebel. Society assigns them, people expect them, and systems manipulate based on them. This soul doesn't fit. None of those roles stick. The victim doesn't survive long enough to be exploited. The hero doesn't need applause or recognition. The rebel doesn't follow scripts of anger or spectacle. Martyrdom isn't appealing because self-sacrifice is never demanded. That refusal to be categorized is what terrifies those who rely on control. Systems are designed to predict behavior based on roles, and when someone defies every expectation, the model collapses. Roles exist to make people manageable. They assign behavior, limit options, and create predictability. This soul doesn't comply with any of it. It doesn't react in ways that can be measured, anticipated, or leveraged. People who try to control it are left frustrated because every attempt to manipulate it through expectation fails. The usual strategies, pressure, guilt, rewards, social engineering, fall flat because they all depend on people responding according to assumed roles. This soul operates outside that structure. It acts from alignment, insight, and clarity, not expectation. That independence is both quiet and devastating. It doesn't need to announce defiance. It doesn't need to fight, prove, or explain. Its very refusal to fit into roles dismantles attempts at control before they even begin. Manipulators depend on predictability. When someone can't be predicted, the power they wield evaporates. This soul doesn't just resist influence, it renders influence meaningless. The inability to assign a role also exposes weakness in others. Those who try to manipulate or dominate this soul reveal their reliance on the structures that fail to apply here. That makes it impossible to intimidate, confuse, or bend this soul. Its armor isn't in strength or aggression, it's in independence. By refusing roles, this soul becomes untouchable, unreadable, and invisible to systems built to control. That is why the summit was convened, not to break strength, but to understand why their usual levers of manipulation simply didn't work. Number 14. No one armored this soul. Pressure did, and pressure doesn't answer to power. Most people think strength comes from guidance, protection, or carefully controlled circumstances. They assume someone builds armor, teaches resilience, or hands down wisdom in measured doses. This soul wasn't armored by anyone. There was no mentor, no guardian, no ritual or system designed to shield or strengthen. Its armor came from pressure, the relentless, uncompromising, unavoidable force of reality applied over and over without mercy. And here's the crucial truth. Pressure doesn't answer to authority, status, or control. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't reward intention. It only delivers consequence, clarity, and refinement. That is what forged this soul. Pressure is unforgiving. It doesn't care about excuses, promises, or potential. It reveals weakness, exposes inconsistency, and tests endurance continuously. Most people break under it, adapt reluctantly, or build temporary defenses. This soul didn't fold. It didn't flinch. Each challenge, betrayal, setback, and exposure became a tool rather than a threat. What others experience as failure or exhaustion became, for this soul, a refining fire. Every moment of relentless pressure was absorbed, analyzed, and converted into internal armor that is permanent and untouchable. The brilliance of armor forged this way is invisibility. No one can point to it, measure it, or replicate it. There's no flash, no performance, no outward sign of strength, because this isn't an external shield. It's cognitive, instinctive, and absolute. Systems that rely on manipulation, intimidation, and influence are powerless because their levers have nothing to grip. Pressure builds immunity, and immunity doesn't respond to control. That is why those who convened the summit were unnerved. They realized that all their power, all their tools, all their influence were meaningless. This soul's strength wasn't a gift from anyone. It was a side effect of reality applied without mercy. And reality doesn't care who sits in authority, who commands armies, or who writes the rules. Pressure alone can create a force impossible to predict, impossible to control, and impossible to break. That is the armor no one can touch, the power no one can replicate, and the truth that terrifies those who thought they were in control. Conclusion. What we've uncovered isn't just a story of resilience, it's the anatomy of a soul that defies every expectation, every manipulation, and every system designed to control it. This soul isn't armored by luck, guidance, or inherited power. It is forged in truth, refined by consequence, hardened by neglect, and perfected by relentless pressure. Every challenge, every betrayal, every disappointment became a brick in a fortress that no authority can breach, no emotional lever can penetrate, and no deception can unsettle. It is not aggression, not theatrics, not noise that makes this soul untouchable. It is clarity, discernment, independence, and a profound understanding of reality that operates beyond manipulation, beyond fear, beyond expectation. The Secret Summit, convened in panic, reveals one terrifying truth. This soul cannot be predicted, controlled, or broken because it exists outside the rules that govern everyone else. It reads patterns, sees through masks, anticipates consequences, and moves with a precision that leaves systems scrambling in confusion. Authority, reward, fear, loyalty, none of it dictates its path. The moment it stopped needing validation, stopped fitting into roles, and stopped hoping to be understood, the armor became complete. It is invisible, silent, and absolute, yet its effect is unmistakable. Those who rely on influence and manipulation find themselves powerless before it. That is the brilliance of this soul, the quiet invincibility that no summit, no strategy, and no force can undo. If this breakdown of a truly untouchable soul has opened your mind, made you see patterns you didn't notice, or left you questioning everything you thought you understood about power, resilience, and influence, then this is only the beginning. Remember to subscribe to the channel so you never miss these insights that dig deeper than anything you've seen before. Like this video if it hit you hard, comment below with your thoughts or revelations, and share it with anyone who needs to understand the mechanics of untouchable strength. Stay alert, stay discerning, and keep observing, because the truth often hides in plain sight, and those who notice it first are the ones who become unstoppable. God bless you.